Buongiorno.
Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I have to say that I'm really honored and happy and glad to attend this extraordinary initiative, and I thank all of the organizers for giving me the chance to take the floor. I wish to say that there are a lot of things that can be said when it comes to memory, things that we forgot.
Ok, grazie.
Wonderful, thank you. So, as Paolo Rossi said, we forgot a lot when it comes to the memory. For instance, we forgot that in the past it's played a role that for us it's even difficult to conceive. And in fact, there was a true art of memory. So actually we had techniques and theoretical assumptions that tried to broaden and increase the natural ability to remember. So this is very interesting for us today as well, because this experience means experiencing the power of images and the mastery and the control of emotions. So let's see which were the main components of this tradition. And let's start with the origins. That is to say, when we didn't know the writing, and in a verbal society, memory plays a fundamental role to ensure survival and the identity of the human community. So in the Greek myths, memory is a goddess, mnemosyne, and the mother of muses, and therefore it's important to think about this charming link between memory and poetry. And the poet has the task of spreading the essential knowledge, and also the task of allowing the past to be remembered so that it's possible to pass on values. And therefore we have the possibility to have in our mind both the person that is telling it and the audience that is listening to the story. So it's linked to the oral society. The problem of memory is strong also in the age of writing, where a precise institutional place was found, Aristotle and Cicero, Quintilian. So memory becomes part and parcel of rhetoric and teaches to speak in public, and also to remember a speech in order to be persuasive also needs to be memorable. And also from here, the art of memory passes from the classic speakers to the ars predicandi of Middle Ages. But in fact, there was the art of memory, and it has been developed on the basis of the most ancient witnesses that tell us that the techniques of the memory are like those of writing, because they teach to have to engrave memories in our mind by connecting them to images, and in the same way as, for instance, a scribe or a copyist engraves. So writing contributes to creating a space idea of our mind and of the memory, in the sense that the mind and the memory appears like a space divided into places, and that is where sensitive images are located that can be either be kept or disappear. St. Augustine talks about caves and palaces and the spaces of the mind and of the memory, whereas other images define it as, for instance, the closet, or like Petrarch talks about, for instance, a specific box where the fruits of the meditation and the reading are kept, but it's possible to open a hole in this casket, in this box, and also the precious contents may fly away. So Dante in Vita Nova described his memory as a book, the book of the memory, containing and also and represented and described the stories of his love to Beatrice, but they share the perception of memory being something that lives in space, in a building or in the space of the book. So now the analysis of the natural working of the memory showed that there are some conditions that make memories easy. That is to say, order and the game of matching and associations. So the fact of having a tidy set of places and having images there, that is to say, images that can strike our attention and they allow us to remember things and words. They will be pivotal for the tradition of memory. And it's very interesting also for our conference today, the reference to the quality of images, that is the images to which we give a specific space for our memory. So they don't have to be trivial. Actually, they have to help us to adopt a different point of view when it comes to memories. So they share something like the strangeness that the Russian formalist included in a specific area of the literature. So the images of the memory shall not just take a picture, a snapshot of memories, rather they have to transform memories through for instance, matching. And in fact, images agentes also means images that play a role, as it happens in the theater of our memory, and which are masked in order to act. The techniques of the memory have a long duration with a number of components that remain steady. And they also change through and over the centuries. They change the meaning and the function of those meanings. For instance, the Christian word inherits, for instance, the classical word and transforms it. So the techniques of the memory are a strong ethical aspect, and are intertwined with meditation and also play a role in the purification from the guilt and then aspiring to God. So the creative role of the memory is important as well. It's not just a matter of recalling words and images that were produced already, but rather to have producing words and images that may become memorable and which are engraved in our minds. And in this perspective as well, if we think about, for instance, Dante's Divina Commedia, we have some extraordinary aspects. In fact, as Francis had said, we may consider Divina Commedia as a system of memory of vices and virtues, and also a pathway that Dante describes through the three kingdoms. And in fact, let's consider the poem from the point of view of the main components that we mentioned, that is to say, the order and the imagines agentes. The order includes the pathway that Dante made from the hell and then up to reaching the heavens. And it's a precise order set by God. It's an order that in hell is forever and then becomes something that is linked to time. And this is in particular to purgatory, whereas in heaven it's just a rhetorical instrument through which God communicates to the human mind. In fact, Beatrice says that all of the souls are not located in the heavens in which Dante meets them, rather they appear in this way. And in fact, this is the way in which, and this is a quote of Dante's Divina Commedia, that is to say, this is something you need to remember. So, in the Divina Commedia, we find this component of the pathway and the order of the different places, and this aspect has immediately intrigued those that, for instance, described the Commedia. Because, for instance, showing the pathway Dante covered is fundamental to get oriented in the map of the poem. And in fact, this is an extraordinary example by Botticelli that depicts the hell. Unfortunately, here we don't see all of the details, but all of the details are filled with the images of people that were in hell that they gradually meet, or this other example of how Botticelli described the heavenly spheres. Then, from the point of view of the order and the pathway, well, of course, the Divina Commedia appears to us as a system of memory, also because in the different places, Dante meets characters that are truly memorable. So not just because, as our book showed, their individuality also takes on a universal value, but also because each one of these characters becomes an image of memory of the specific virtue that is rewarded, or also of the vice which is condemned. So in this case, there's the matching between the guilt and the penalty. So the explicit statement of this principle is expressed by Bertrand de Bond. So we observe the specific retaliation. That is to say, this is one of the most unbelievable images and shocking portions of the Inferno, because this is Bertrand de Bond. That is to say, he holds one's head. And in this case, there it is, because he pushed the prince to go against his father, and his image makes it clear the essence of the guilt that affects him, because he actually destroyed the body of the state and separated the head from the body. So in this case, this shows the similarity and considers the metaphor. So this is the description by Dore, which represents the same and depicts the same episode. So actually the metaphor is literally considered, so the similarity becomes visible. And in this case, these become images of memory, images sedentes, both of the guilt and of the heavenly justice. But there are emotions that trigger everything. That is to say, it's them that also convey the reaction before the nature of the penalty. And in fact, Dante's memory is passionate, that involves the pilgrims, but also the poet that writes down what he saw. It is a memory that lasts while writing and which intends to convey the message to us. So the passionate memory is intertwined with the idea of the retaliation, and then with a basic technique that is used to develop the images of the memory. Think about, for instance, the deepest part of the hell, where those that betrayed their relatives and parents are in the icy lake, and here we have Fuseli's image, and in particular here Dante says, and quotes, that these people actually were in the icy lake and had no chance to go away from it. So I saw the thousands of faces that were destroyed by the cold. And each time I see, for instance, icy waters, I immediately feel cold, and I'll always be cold. So we have a contrast between the past tense, so the story, which is the pilgrim's travel and journey, and the present times, the moment in which the writing is done. So this relationship between the past and the present, between the memory and the writing, is always characterized by a strong emotional component. In fact, the beginning of the Divina Commedia, I found myself in an obscure maze. Oh, it's very difficult to tell how it was, this wild and strong that renews its fears. So how was it in the past? How was the word in the past? And then when you write it, then you renew the fear you had when you first lived it. And as we saw in the verses I mentioned before, when there's not just this idea between the past and the present, but also everything is projected towards the future. And in fact, there's a specific experience of the earthly, let us say, the fact of seeing the icy lake recalls in the mind, by analogy, the scene in hell. Those that changed the rules of love, that were not sensitive to love are now plunged in the lake and in ice. And then so this is the nature of guilt. So the memory and the terrible images in Dante's minds and are strengthened and even reinforced in the future. In other words, the moral horror is also extended in the physical horror and in the feeling of cold and ice that the experience generates. So the border between the body and psyche are somehow outpassed. The strength of the imagination is able to do so, and we as readers, we are invited to share with Dante the entire process with the knowledge and rejection, both the moral and the physical rejection. With Dante, the medieval memory performs all the tasks it had to carry out and conveys the memory of vices and virtues and the order of the world, and also the interior evolution and transformation up to stating the limits of the heaven. So it's the traces left by emotions that will represent an evidence of the truth of the experience lived. And in fact, quote, the sweet that stamped out of it. So the the universal image that is conveyed shows that, well, now we cannot show any longer what is not visible any longer, but what remains is the emotion and the sweetness of that moment, and also the reward stemming from that experience. I'd like to conclude with some examples taken from the Renaissance, because in the Renaissance period, the art of the memory is linked to the encyclopedical dreams like Giulio Camillo, but at the same time, it continues to be used for practical purposes in schools and universities and in preaching. And there's also a specific component, that is to say, the strength of the eros, the power of the images that evoke it. And there is also a specific treatise by Pietro della Venna that was written at the end of the 15th centuries, and which offers a variant of one of the typical ingredients of the tradition of the memory, that is to say, the alphabet. You see here from Giovan Battista dalla Porta from in Ars Memoriae. And in fact, it says, well, generally speaking, instead of using letters, I have images of the ladies I loved. And, of course, this works very well. Of course, those are sensitive to this particular experience. Well, this is absolutely important. So the fact of using as images of the memory, the images of the people that you loved in your lives. And since, for instance, these works were written by men, well, we have images of women. And it's very interesting because when dealing with the reactions that the Protestants made against the use of images, the Catholic Church made an interesting analysis on the limits and the power of images. For instance, in 1582, Cardinal Gabriele Paleotti quoted as an example of the power of images the arts of memory, and said that images, live images, are also and almost violating our senses. So images are so strong that they violate our senses where no precautions are adopted. So it's interesting to see how in the fact of using as imaginary agendas the images of young ladies, but at the same time, this may cause problems. For instance, at the beginning of the 17th century, there was the use of a naked lady to represent the soul in a treaty by Girolamo Parafiotto, a Franciscan monk from the Calabria region. So it is as if the use of a naked image to depict the soul on the one side works as an image of the memory, but on the other side, it takes it apart and removes its immediate power. And so from this point of view, it's very interesting to see what happens immediately after. For instance, in the Arte di Predicare Bene, the Bishop of Tortona, he says, yeah, this type of images may work very well, but the problem is that you risk to stop there just before the erotic image and not to use it as an image of your memory. So you remain stuck there as it happens. When, for instance, something at the middle of the sea just blocks the vessel. So this is a way of focusing around the objects that we desire and turn them into something that fills our vital spaces. Then at the end of the 16th century, the link between art of the memory, emotions, and literary creation is clearly adopted by Giordano Bruno, that was burned in Rome. And for him, passions are the main constraint. And in fact, he wrote that passions and the possibility to act along passions is such an important secret in rhetorical treatises, but also for instance, a specific test in which the issue of passions is linked to the memory. There is a say the Church's song, where Chicha explains that it's a lie, what's generally said, that she transforms men into animals, because she only takes out and makes it visible what is hidden in the soul of a man. So if in the soul of man we have beastly instincts, she makes them visible. And in this way, she takes out the nature of man. She removes the mask of man and she makes it visible, what is generally hidden. And the art of memory allows to remember the combinations between animals and passions. Here we see some of the images that we find in this text. So in this case, Cantus Churchos here takes on the role of reporting, for instance, the mystifications that are present in the society. So with this stream of truth and transparency, this is how I like to close my contribution. Thank you.
Grazie Lina, grazie davvero.
Thank you so much, Lina. Your contribution gave me a strong emotion because it is so beautiful to bring together such different disciplines through everyday language. Please allow me to ask a question. As a neuroscientist, I interpret something you said. Memory is something that lives in space and creates an ordered set of places. You spoke about these techniques. As a neuroscientist, I'd like to say that the brain is organized through maps. Mr. Tolman's cognitive map, we know about spatial maps, we know about conceptual maps. So probably there's something very deep in what you said, which goes beyond a cultural analogy. This is just a comment of mine. I don't know, are there questions? May I say something about this? Yes, this is a fascinating topic which lies at the basis of a cooperation I have undertaken between Scuola Normale and Alberto Maffei. This scientist teased us because we are experts in literature, but then he was fascinated by the issue you are addressing. How much of this intellectual analysis connected to historical text, how much of all this is connected to physiology, to physiological structures? And it is extremely interesting. We may talk about this. There are many techniques which have to do with memorizing, which consist in connecting images and that which must be remembered. I'd like to understand from you both how this works in the brain. Starting from Pico della Mirandola, famous for his memory, that memorizing many objects is difficult, and those who can and do use techniques. Antonino, you were talking about brain maps, indeed. I think that Hannah Monnier will be speaking exactly about this, so I'd like to leave the floor to Hannah at this point. Let us wait and see.
Okay.
D'accordo. Allora, grazie ancora, grazie.
Thank you very much once again.